I stood in the cold shadow of the hallway, watching my son's wife carefully turn a brass key in the lock of my private study. This was a room I had kept strictly locked for 12 long years. It was my sanctuary, the place where my late wife's deepest secrets and our family's entire financial legacy were stored securely away from the world. Jessica thought I was at the hardware store across town. She thought she was incredibly clever. She thought I was just a tired old carpenter whose mind was slowly fading with age. She was severely mistaken. I spent 45 years restoring historic Victorian homes across Boston. My entire career was built on inspecting structural integrity and finding hidden rot beneath fresh paint. I know exactly how to spot a parasite eating away at a beautiful foundation from the inside out. And the moment she walked into our family 2 years ago, I knew exactly what kind of rot she was. But if you confront a predator too early, you just push your child right into their jaws. I had to be patient. I had to play the long game and let her think she was winning. I watched her push the heavy mahogany door open. The hinges did not make a single sound because I kept them meticulously oiled. I watched her rush straight for the vintage iron safe tucked beneath the frosted window. She pulled out a thick stack of manila folders, property deeds, bank statements, the master trust file. My heart pounded against my ribs like a heavy steel hammer, but I did not breathe. I just stood there in the absolute dark, letting her dig her own grave. She had somehow managed to copy my key. She had officially crossed a line of betrayal that could never be uncrossed. But what she did not know, what she could never have anticipated, was that the safe was a complete decoy. I had prepared for this exact moment for over a year. The real financial documents were locked securely in a bank vault downtown. The papers she was greedily holding were legally binding bait, and she had just swallowed the hook completely. If you have ever felt that sickening realization that someone you trusted is a complete fraud, you know exactly how cold my blood ran in that moment. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. My late wife Eleanor was a brilliant forensic accountant. She spent her entire professional life tracking stolen money and watching wealthy families tear each other apart over pure greed. Before breast cancer took her away from us 12 years ago, she made me hold her hand and promise one specific thing. She told me I had to protect our son David from the wolves of this world. David was 32 years old at the time. He was a highly gifted landscape architect. He was brilliant with designs and soil, but dangerously blind to the profound darkness in human nature. He possessed a rare kind of empathy that made him want to save every single person he met. Over our lifetime, Eleanor and I built a massive estate. We owned a historic property in Beacon Hill and managed a substantial investment fund. But Eleanor was a visionary. She set up an ironclad blind trust. David would not receive a single penny of the principal until his 40th birthday. We desperately wanted him to build his own strength and character first. Then, on a rainy evening, he brought Jessica home for Thanksgiving dinner. Jessica was 27. She was visually striking, impeccably dressed in designer clothes, and completely hollow on the inside. When David proudly introduced her to me in our grand foyer, her eyes did not even bother to look at my face. They looked straight up at the crystal chandelier. They scanned the antique Persian rugs on the hardwood floors. She was mentally calculating my net worth before she even shook my hand. Over a dinner of roasted turkey and wine, she played the part of the sweet and supportive girlfriend perfectly. But her questions were highly calculated and deeply disturbing. She leaned in and asked if I found the massive 3-story house too lonely for a widower. She asked how property taxes worked for historical landmarks in Boston. David beamed with pride, genuinely thinking she was just fascinated by our family history. I felt a freezing cold chill run down my spine. I saw the absolute hunger in her dark eyes. It was a deep, ravenous greed that could never be satisfied. The very next morning, I called my estate attorney. I told him to reinforce every single legal wall around Eleanor's trust. We built an absolute fortress of paperwork. 6 months later, David proposed with a beautiful diamond ring. I swallowed my heavy dread and immediately insisted on a strict prenuptial agreement. I framed it as a rigid corporate requirement from the trust managers so David would not blame me for being hostile. Jessica was absolutely furious behind closed doors. I knew she threw a massive emotional tantrum in their apartment. But she signed the document anyway. She signed it because she arrogantly believed she could manipulate her way around a piece of paper once she had a wedding band on her finger. They got married in an absurdly expensive ceremony that completely wiped out David's personal savings. I paid for the luxury catering. I smiled brightly for the expensive photographers. I played the part of the proud father to absolute perfection. After the honeymoon, they moved into David's beautiful, fully paid-off townhouse in Cambridge. Almost immediately, the devastating financial bleeding began. Jessica abruptly quit her corporate job in marketing. She told David she was finally going to start a high-end interior design firm. She claimed she needed his absolute financial support to chase her dreams. David, being the endlessly supportive and loving husband, took on everything. He paid all the expensive household bills. He paid for her luxury car lease every month. He funded her expensive lunches and fake networking trips to New York City. He was working 70 grueling hours a week just to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, I hired a top-tier private investigator. I am not a man who acts on mere suspicion or emotion. I gather undeniable proof. For 18 agonizing months, Jessica did not secure a single design client. Her business registration did not even exist with the state. She was spending her days at luxury spas and high-end designer boutiques. She was draining my son's life force while secretly trying to find a direct path into my estate. She started asking David intrusive questions about my health. She suggested I needed full-time care and that they should move into my Beacon Hill home to manage things. She was preparing a hostile takeover. But she got reckless and impatient. And impatience is the fatal flaw that destroys every predator. Which brings us right back to that freezing Tuesday afternoon, with her standing in my locked study, holding the fake financial documents I had meticulously left just for her to find. I watched my son slowly wither away. David had always been vibrant. He loved the smell of rain on fresh soil. He lived for the feeling of creating something beautiful out of dirt and seed. But within a year of marrying Jessica, the bright light in his eyes completely died. He was carrying the weight of a massive boulder on his tired shoulders. Jessica demanded absolute perfection. She needed organic groceries delivered daily. She required a personal trainer. And she insisted on remodeling their perfectly fine kitchen to fit her new brand as a high-end designer. My son took on extra commercial landscaping projects just to pay her massive credit card bills. He came over to my house one Sunday afternoon. His hands were covered in deep calluses and ingrained dirt. He fell asleep on my vintage leather sofa before the coffee even finished brewing. I covered him with a heavy wool blanket. I looked at his exhausted face and felt a deep, burning anger rising in my chest. Fathers are supposed to protect their children from monsters under the bed. But what do you do when the monster is sleeping in your son's bed? I did not yell. I did not lecture him. I went to my desk and hired an elite corporate investigator. I needed to know exactly where the money was bleeding out. The confidential reports started coming in every Friday. They were sickening to read. Jessica was not building a legitimate business. She was building a lavish lifestyle on the back of a dying horse. She spent thousands of dollars at luxury boutiques in Back Bay. She was having 4-hour lunches with women who were just as hollow as she was. Not a single dime of revenue was ever generated for her fake company. But the most disturbing detail was her internet search history. The investigator legally pulled her public digital footprint. She was researching the average life expectancy for men over 70. She was researching inheritance tax laws in the state of Massachusetts. She was waiting for me to die. She was counting down the days until she could tear down the legacy my wife and I built. A parasite will eventually consume its host until there is absolutely nothing left. David was running out of money. The financial well was drying up fast. That is exactly when Jessica shifted her focus directly onto me. The Cambridge townhouse was no longer enough to satisfy her massive ego. She wanted the historic Beacon Hill mansion. She convinced David that I was getting too old to manage the large property alone. She told him it would be a beautiful family transition if they moved in to take care of me. David brought the idea to me with hesitant hope. I looked him dead in the eye and gave a flat, uncompromising no. I told him my home was my private sanctuary. I told him they needed to stand firmly on their own 2 feet. David was crushed. He angrily accused me of being stubborn and unsupportive. We did not speak for a month after that terrible argument. It broke my heart completely. But a wall is not a wall if it bends to emotion. My refusal made Jessica incredibly desperate. She realized the front door was permanently bolted shut. So she decided to break through the back window. Which brings us exactly to that freezing afternoon in my dark study. I was standing quietly in the doorway, watching her read my fake financial documents. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated greed. I finally stepped out of the shadows. The heavy floorboards creaked under my heavy boots. Jessica gasped sharply and dropped the manila folders. The papers scattered across the antique Persian rug like dead autumn leaves. Her face turned completely white. She looked exactly like a rat caught in a steel trap. She tried to stammer out a pathetic excuse. She said the front door was open. She said she was just looking for a pen to leave me a quick note. Her lies were incredibly insulting to my intelligence. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply pointed a calloused finger toward the dark hallway. "Get out of my house," I whispered. My voice was colder than the bitter Boston winter outside. She practically ran down the stairs in total panic. I listened to the heavy oak front door slam shut behind her. The trap had officially snapped closed. I did not call David that night. I let the poison fester in the dark. I knew Jessica would spend the entire evening spinning a massive web of lies. She would paint me as a paranoid, abusive old man trying to destroy their marriage. The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I drove to their townhouse in Cambridge. The sky was gray and heavy with impending snow. I knocked hard on the front door. David opened it slowly. He looked like a walking ghost. Dark circles carved deep shadows under his bloodshot eyes. The tension in the house was suffocating. I walked straight past him into their modern living room. Jessica was sitting on the velvet sofa. She had her arms crossed tight over her chest. Her jaw was set with absolute defiance. She had rehearsed her victim routine perfectly through the night. I did not take off my heavy winter coat. I stood over her and delivered the cold facts. "You broke into my locked study yesterday," I said calmly. David looked away at the floor. He was completely miserable. Jessica immediately exploded into a theatrical rage. "I was trying to protect our future," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You are hoarding millions in a massive house while your son kills himself working to support us. You are a selfish, arrogant tyrant. You treat David like a helpless child." I turned my head slowly toward my son. "Did you authorize her to search my private records?" I asked him directly. David shook his head slowly. "No, Dad. I had no idea she went over there." Jessica realized David was not blindly defending her actions. She shifted her tactics instantly. She started crying. Big, fake crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks. "David," she sobbed heavily. "I saw the legal papers. He has a trust fund worth millions. He hid it from us. He designed it to make sure I never get a single penny. He hates me. He wants to destroy our marriage." I let her cry. I let the silence stretch out until it became physically uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. "The documents you found yesterday were completely fake," I said softly. "They were a test. The real truth is far more devastating. And it is time my son finally sees exactly who he married." I stood in the center of their modern living room, like a judge ready to deliver a final verdict. Jessica was still weeping loudly on the velvet sofa. She was playing the desperate victim to absolute perfection. She wanted David to believe I was a wealthy tyrant trying to ruin their beautiful marriage. I reached deep into the inner pocket of my heavy wool coat. I did not pull out the trust documents. I pulled out a thick yellow envelope containing the private investigation file. I tossed the heavy binder onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a loud crack that echoed through the quiet room. Jessica instantly stopped crying. Her breath caught in her throat. I looked directly at my exhausted son. "Your wife does not own an interior design company," I said with absolute authority. My voice was quiet, but it carried the heavy weight of a falling tree. "She does not have a state business license. She does not have a single client." David stared at the heavy binder. He looked back at me with pure confusion, clouding his dark eyes. Jessica lunged forward to grab the papers before he could touch them. But David was faster. He picked up the heavy file and opened the first page. The silence in the room became incredibly dense. You could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. The documents inside were undeniable. There were hundreds of pages of itemized bank records and surveillance photos. "I hired a professional investigator 18 months ago," I explained calmly. "I watched you burn yourself alive, working 70 hours a week to fund her dream. But her dream was just a calculated illusion." David slowly turned the pages. His hands began to tremble violently. Every time he worked a grueling weekend shift in the freezing rain, Jessica was buying vintage purses on Newbury Street. Every time he skipped lunch to save a few extra dollars, she was drinking expensive champagne at luxury hotel spas. She was a parasite feeding directly on his beating heart. Jessica realized her theatrical performance was completely over. The sweet mask melted away and revealed the ugly monster hiding underneath. The betrayal was a brutal physical blow to my son. A man can survive physical exhaustion and terrible physical pain, but discovering that the person you love is secretly draining your life force will destroy your soul from the inside out. David stood up slowly. The binder slipped from his calloused hands and crashed onto the floor. He did not look at Jessica. He looked directly through her body like she was made of cheap glass. "David, please," Jessica whispered in a sudden panic. "We can go to counseling. We can fix this together. I was just stressed about our financial future." Her voice sounded like nails scratching across a chalkboard. David turned his back to her and walked straight to the front door. "Dad," he said in a hollow voice, "take me to the Beacon Hill house." I nodded silently. We drove through the gray Boston streets without saying a single word to each other. When we arrived at the historic mansion, the air inside felt completely different. It felt like the house was finally exhaling after holding its breath for 2 long years. I led David down the quiet hallway and unlocked the heavy mahogany door of my study. We stepped into the room. I walked to the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small sealed envelope. The beautiful cursive handwriting of Eleanor was perfectly preserved on the front. I handed the letter to David. "Your mother wrote this 3 weeks before her lungs failed," I told him softly. "She made me swear to keep it hidden until you were in real danger." David broke the old wax seal. He sat down in my leather chair and read the final words of his mother. Eleanor wrote about her deep fear of opportunistic predators. She warned him that his pure heart was a massive target for people who only calculate wealth. "Generosity under observation is just a cheap theatrical performance," he read out loud. His voice cracked with heavy emotion. "Generosity in the absolute dark is true character." He lowered the paper. A single tear fell onto the old ink. The heavy illusion he had carried for 2 years finally shattered into a million sharp pieces. The naivety in David completely died that afternoon. Only cold iron remained. We drove back to the Cambridge townhouse to finish the terrible work. Jessica was waiting in the kitchen. She had abandoned the crying victim routine completely. She was standing tall with her jaw clenched and her eyes burning with pure entitlement. She truly believed she still had leverage. "I am legally your wife," she snarled like a cornered animal. "You owe me half of this property. You owe me spousal support." I wasted the best years of my youth living in this pathetic tiny house while your father hoards millions. David did not scream. He did not throw a single punch at the wall. He simply opened his laptop and pulled up the prenuptial agreement. You are forgetting the legal document you happily signed before the wedding, David said. His voice was completely flat and emotionless. This townhouse was titled entirely in my name long before I ever met you. You have zero claim to this real estate. Jessica turned a deep shade of ugly red. I will drag you through court for years. She screamed at the top of her lungs. I will ruin your public reputation. I finally stepped forward and delivered the absolute crushing blow. If you attempt to contest this divorce in any court, I said smoothly, my legal team will hand the entire private investigation file to a federal judge. We will file formal criminal charges for grand larceny and systemic financial fraud. You will not just leave with nothing. You will leave in handcuffs. The color instantly drained from her angry face. She realized the massive steel trap had closed around her neck perfectly. She had absolutely nowhere left to run. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your designer clothes and exit this property forever, David told her quietly. He shut the laptop. The sharp sound echoed through the room like a heavy gunshot. She packed her bags the very next morning. The divorce took less than 4 months to finalize. Because of the ironclad legal walls we built, she walked away from our family with absolutely nothing. 4 bitter winters have passed since we finally cut the infection out of our family tree. The heavy snow has melted, and the historic Beacon Hill mansion feels incredibly warm and alive again. David comes over every single Sunday evening for dinner. But he does not walk through the heavy oak front door alone anymore. He brings Sarah. Sarah is 32 years old. She is a dedicated high school history teacher who drives a battered old sedan. She laughs loudly from the bottom of her stomach and has incredibly kind eyes. The very first time David brought her to my home, she did not look at the expensive crystal chandelier. She did not ask about the property taxes or the square footage. She walked straight into the living room and pointed at the silver picture frame on the mantel. She asked me what kind of music Eleanor loved to listen to on rainy days. She wanted to know the genuine soul of our family, not the market value of the real estate. After dinner last night, Sarah insisted on washing the dishes completely by herself. David and I walked out onto the back porch to look at the blooming garden. The night air was crisp and peaceful. Thank you, Dad, David said softly while looking at the stars. For keeping the study door locked. For letting me hate you until I was finally strong enough to see the real truth. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I felt a profound, radiant sense of closure wash over my tired bones. The storm was entirely gone. The foundation of our family was finally secure. I still keep my private study locked, but it is no longer a dark fortress against dangerous predators. It is just a quiet, peaceful room filled with the beautiful memories of the woman I loved. I want to know exactly what you think about my actions. Did I overstep my boundaries as a father by hiring a private investigator to follow my daughter-in-law? Or was I completely justified in doing whatever it took to protect my son from a financial parasite? Leave a 1 in the comments if you think I am a hero. Leave a 2 if you think I should have minded my own business. Or leave a 3 if you think David was far too blind for his own good. Tell me where you are watching this video from right now, and what time it is in your beautiful city. I truly love connecting with all of you across the globe. If you have ever survived a relationship with a manipulative predator who tried to drain your entire life away, please share your story down below in the comments so we can help others recognize the dangerous red flags before it is too late. Please hit that subscribe button right now if you want to hear more deep stories about family protection and cold, hard justice. Make sure to click the video on the screen right now to hear another incredible story of revenge. Stay strong and always protect your family.